Good morning. Welcome to week one of Momentum at the Movies. Come on. Yes. And welcome to week one of the NFL. Welcome to week one of Mo Groups. Come on. It's all going down right now, all right? So grab paperback Bibles, pass them down to each other. I'll tell you where to turn in just a little bit, or you can feel free to download the Bible app. Follow along there. If you need a Bible that you can understand, feel free to take one of these home on us. Welcome to those of you at mochurch.tv. If you're in the Cleveland area, we'd love for you to come join us, meet the freaks in person sometimes when you get the courage to do that. So welcome. Yeah, pumped to be here for Momentum at the Movies. This week we're talking about Lion, one of the nominated best films this year. I'm afraid to do this. This is the week of all 4 weeks that I'm most afraid to do this. But how many of you have seen the movie Lion? I knew it. I didn't even ask in the practice service, so I'm not even asking. Yeah, it is not something that was really marketed a whole bunch. It wasn't like you saw a bunch of trailers probably on TV or even at the movies, but it was nominated for Best Film. I mean, this is a really good movie, and we usually slip one of those in the movie series, a movie that you didn't see, but you should see. So I highly recommend this movie. If you ever want to see me cry, just watch a movie like this with me. I unabashedly cry through films like this. I'm just like, it's beautiful. He was in India, and then this happened. I love Indians and all that kind of stuff. My buddy Sanjay down here front row, my Indian brother. Yep. I got a couple friends at Dunkin' Donuts also that I'm tight with. So yeah. So anyways, so this movie is based on an autobiographical book by Saroo Brierley, who's the main character in the film. And so, like I said, great movie. But the film is set in 1986 when 5-year-old Saroo, that's why I got this tattoo, 5-year-old Saroo, he lives with his mother. He has a younger sister. He has an older brother who's a teenager, and his older brother's name is Gadu. Okay, so being, a white American, I needed this just to help me out. But this is Saroo, little guy. He's like the cutest kid actor in the world. And then his older brother, teenager, Gadu. And they're tight, okay? And we learn right away that they're a poor family in kind of west central India. And at the beginning of the film, we see Gadu and little Saroo stealing coal from freight trains to trade for some milk for their family. And that's the kind of situation they're in. Well, one day, teenage Gadu wakes up very early in the morning to go to work. And he says that he'll be gone for a week. And little Saroo wakes up and he says, hey, I want to come with you. And Gadu says, you can't. You're too small to lift bales. And this is night work. You can't do this stuff. And little Saroo says, I can lift anything. And he gets up and he picks up a chair. He shows he can lift the chair up over his head. And Gadu's like, no, you can't come with me. This is night work. You're a little kid. Can't do that. He says, I can lift anything. And he grabs this metal bicycle and he lifts it up. And little 5-year-old, his arms are like this big. He lifts it up and he holds it and he's like shaking or whatever. And Gadu's like, come on already. But he holds it up. He's like straining. He's like, okay, all right, fine. You can come with me. And so they hop on that bike and they ride together to the local train station. And of course they can't pay to get on the train, so they sneak onto it and they're stowaways. And they wait on this train until it takes them to the place that they're going. And late at night they get off the train and older brother is carrying little Gadu. He's carrying him out. Big one's Gadu. Screwed it up already. Little one's Saroo. He's carrying little Saroo and he carries him out and he's asleep. And he lays him down on a bench in the platform right there next to the train, and he tries to wake him up. And he shakes him, and he says, Saroo, wake up. Saroo says, no, don't annoy me, let me sleep. And he says, you got to get up, I got to go find out about work. And Saroo won't wake up. And so Gadu says, okay. He says, I got to go find out about work. This is my fault. I shouldn't have brought you. You're too young for night work. I'm going to go find out about this job. You wait here and don't go anywhere. And as soon as he leaves, 5-year-old Saroo falls back asleep on this bench on the platform. Well, when he wakes up, it's like the middle of the night now. No one is on the platform. Everyone's gone. There's an empty train sitting there in the tracks, and everyone's just disappeared. The only thing is like insects making noise out there, okay? And so he wakes up, and he gets up, and he looks around. Little Saroo looks around, and he gets up, he says, Gadu? Gadu? And he just starts walking around. Gadu? And then finally thinks maybe he's on the train. And so he wanders onto this empty train. He gets in there and he starts looking around in some of the different compartments, and he starts yelling, "Gadoo! Gadoo!" And he finally sits down in the train, and he falls back asleep again. When he wakes up, the train's in motion. And he wakes up and he looks around, and he realizes, oh no, like I've left the station now. I've left my brother back there. I don't know where I'm at, where I'm going. I don't know what's going on. And he stays on the train because he can't get off, and he looks out the window, and at times they might go slowly through a field, and there'll be kids working out in the field, and he'll yell out the window, "Gadoo! Gadoo!" And he'll just keep yelling for his brother. But finally, he arrives at his destination after at least 2 days of being stuck on this train, and he arrives on the east coast of India at Calcutta. And so now he's in a totally foreign city to himself. He gets out and he doesn't know anyone. He's lonely, scared, he's penniless. He doesn't even know the local language of Bengali. He doesn't know it. It's a totally different language in this part of India. And so he walks around and he tries to figure out what to do next. So in 1986, little 5-year-old Saru, real life story here, becomes one of the over 80,000 children who go missing in India every year. 80,000 a year. So turn in your Bibles to Luke chapter 15, and in the House Bibles, that's page 848. Luke 15 is interesting because it's really kind of like a chapter that's God's good news of his love for mankind concentrated into story form. 3 stories, 2 very short stories and 1 longer story. But if I were starting at square one with someone who was curious about investigating Jesus, curious about Jesus, I would want them to read the good news about God's love for them contained in Luke chapter 15. These 3 stories that Jesus told. Now, they're all about lost things. And this chapter contains 3 different parables, which are stories that kind of have a spiritual point to them. But Jesus does such a great job of capturing the stress and frustration that comes with losing something. How many of you couldn't find your keys this morning? Or anytime recently you couldn't find the remote? It's so frustrating, okay? It'll make a preacher cuss, all right? And so you're like, man, but Jesus does such a good job of capturing this in these 3 stories. In the first story, the frustration of losing an animal. It's about a lost sheep. The second story, the frustration of losing a possession that's expensive and even sentimental, is the second story. It's about a lost coin, and it's probably a coin that was one of many coins on a wedding necklace. And so it's interesting that the first story would have appealed to boys and men. The second would have appealed to girls and women. Jesus is for all people. And the third story is about losing a child, okay? It's a story of a lost wayward son who on his own accord leaves home. And so this morning we're just going to focus on the short first story in Luke 15 that's about that sheep that was lost. And it also sets it up at the beginning of the chapter by talking about the context of why Jesus even tells these 3 stories. So Luke 15, starting in verse 1, says this. Now the tax collectors and the sinners, now these are the riffraff, the irreligious, the misfits. The tax collectors and the sinners were all gathered around to hear Jesus. It says, but the Pharisees, which is really kind of a denomination, if you will, of Jewish religion in the first century, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, those are the preachers, they muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and he eats with them." So then Jesus told them this parable. He said, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Jesus says, doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? Like when you lose a little Saru, don't you go after Saru? Don't you empathize and understand what Saru's going through? And you go through him because you go find him because he's valuable to you? Isn't that what you would do in this situation? Now, in first century Israel, a flock of 100 would have been a sizable flock, a normal flock. Flocks typically range from about 20 to 200. Okay, so this is sizable. Typically, you might have 2 or 3 shepherds that are watching sheep, maybe not just one person's sheep, but like a communal flock. You know, these are several people's sheep that they're watching together. And so an interesting thing is at night, the shepherds would take account of those sheep. I really sincerely think this is probably where we get the practice of telling kids a way to fall asleep is counting sheep. Because at nighttime, shepherds, for instance in Israel, they would do a head count. We know how many sheep we're supposed to have. And in this case, there's 100, but the shepherd comes up one short. And he's like, uh-oh, there's one missing. We got 99 here, okay? So the shepherd is personally responsible for any lost sheep. He will pay for that out of his own paycheck if he loses a sheep. In fact, if a sheep is killed by a predator, the shepherd would bring the bloody fleece back to the village to show I didn't just lose it. It was attacked by a human, a lion, a hyena, a bear. And so here is to show it so that he wouldn't have to pay. And he'd show, obviously, usually shepherds would lay down their lives to try to protect their sheep sometimes. So the good shepherd was an expert in tracking. I mean, a really good shepherd could follow the tracks of a sheep for miles through the hills to try to find that one sheep that had disappeared. They were really good trackers, and this was all in a day's work, risking his life for the sheep. Now, the searching shepherd would usually leave the remaining flock, if he were to go off and try to find a missing wandering sheep, he would usually leave the remaining flock to one of the other shepherds, sometimes a boy shepherd or someone else, and he would leave them and he'd say, you take these back to the village to safety. I'm going to go out probably into the night and start searching for the one lost sheep. But in this case, Jesus doesn't explicitly say if they were left to another shepherd or not, and that might just be the twist in the plot. It might be the point of saying, here's how valuable the one, you, are to the shepherd, is he would leave the 99 in the open country and go frantically search for the one to see if he could save the one also. And so that might just be a twist in the plot. But either way, the shepherd gives himself completely to the search for the one lost sheep, and the lost sheep becomes the priority. That's a very important point. The lost sheep becomes the priority. Now, as if the analogy isn't clear coming up I-77 here, what it means to be spiritually lost is it means to be disconnected from the good shepherd, Jesus. It means to be far from God relationally. It means to be lost, wandering, having no spiritual leadership from Jesus. I'm not taking any leadership or direction from Jesus, not receiving direction or protection from Jesus. And maybe at one point that person did follow Jesus but chose to walk away, and now they're lost. Or maybe it's someone who never felt like they were a part of any kind of flock. They're a lost person who never followed Jesus. Either way, it's someone that Jesus is passionate about, prioritizing about, to love this person, to search and rescue for that person. Now, there's one thing that little Saru in the film could tell you, because he's a real man. If he could tell you one thing, if this lost sheep could tell you one thing, if I could tell you one thing from my experience, it's this, and it's a very theologically deep statement. Lost sucks. I mean, it really does suck. You ever been lost? Like, you ever as a kid get lost? Anybody? Like, to be the one that gets separated from your siblings, your parents, whatever, like, oh man, I'm stuck in Walmart. I don't speak the same language as anyone here, you know? Like, I'm really lost right now. Like, where the crap am I at? It's scary. Like, you get really, really scared, and it's an awful feeling to have to be lost. And the same is true of spiritual lostness. Now, this is momentum. I know I'm speaking to the choir here, okay, a little bit. There are a lot of you who are like, I know what it's like to be spiritually lost. I'm living it every day. Or I remember a couple years ago what that felt like. It feels awful. Like to not have any truly reliable sense of direction in life. That's lost. Not knowing what your purpose is in life. Not knowing what you're doing even. You know, to not know if there's a purpose for the pain that you're going through right now. Just say, I just don't even know. Not having a community or a flock of people that you can lean on or that will rally to you when you're wounded. Loss sucks. Like much of the motivation for starting Momentum Christian Church that me and Shannon talked about when Momentum, even when it didn't have a name yet, and we were thinking about calling it Buckeye Christian Church or Super Fresh Christian Church and all the dumb names we were coming up with. Yeah, you're welcome for coming up with Momentum because we had some other dumb names. And after last night, I don't know that we want to name it Buckeye Christian Church. I know, it's so sad, trust me. I'm crying on the inside. I'm like, so like when we were thinking about that, a lot of the motivation is that Jesus cares and prioritizes lost sheep. And I remember what it's like to be lost. Like that fuels my ministry when I think about why am I doing what I'm doing? Why? Ministry's hard, ministry's painful, ministry's hard work, all that stuff. One of the things that fuels that is thinking, man, I remember what it's like to be lost. I remember living in a family where we were all lost. We didn't know what the crap we were doing. We were making it up as we went along. It was clear my parents were making it up as they went along. Like, you don't know what's going on right now. We were lost, and lost sucks. Like, I remember always feeling lonely, even though I was surrounded by people, feeling lonely. Yeah, I lived in fear. I lived in insecurity. I didn't feel valuable to anyone. Even though people were telling me they loved me, I didn't feel valuable or loved. When I was 15 years old, I wanted to run away so many times, and especially previous to 15 years old, because 15 is when I became a follower of Jesus. I had tons of anger bottled up in me, especially toward my stepdad, Joe. I know I wanted to hurt people at times. I know some people who are lost that want to hurt themselves. And there's all these things, just of feeling very unsure about what God thinks of you. And that's how I felt. Lost sucks. And the thing about being lost is you're kind of exposed. In so many ways, you are unprotected. You don't have a leader. You don't have direction or protection. And that's a scary thing, whether it's for an animal or a person. We lived in the country growing up. I was primarily raised by my grandmother and my grandfather. My grandfather was the kind of person you'd want to be your neighbor. Super kind, generous, fun, made lots of corny grandpa jokes, all that kind of stuff. He was just a great guy. My grandmother, she passed away in 99. She was the exact opposite. They had kind of they had a sitcom couple thing going on or whatever. Like, he was super nice, super fun. She was grumpy and cantankerous. And she had about 5 people that she was kind to in life. And if you were on her long you-know-what list, you were going to hear it all the time, okay? And so my grandma was not nice. She didn't get along with the neighbors. And so there was always some dispute between my grandmother and the neighbors. Well, one of our next-door neighbors was the Kautses. The last name was Kauts. And they had a pet that would wander away from home sometimes. And my grandmother kept one of those pump-action BB guns in the back by the sliding glass door in our country property, to shoot that thing in the butt, and any other animal that came into our yard that she didn't deem fuzzy and huggable, she would shoot it in the butt and send it yelping back to its house or whatever. Like, Grandma, you really got to be, I was really a little kid at this time. This is early grade school. You really got to shoot it in the butt. Shoot that beep thing. She was a cusser, and she didn't put the right cuss words in the right sentences. Like, she was not artistic at cussing. I'll just say that up front. And so she would get back there and pump that BB gun. Well, one time the Kautz's dog wandered away from where it should be. And it got a little bit lost, wandered into our yard, came in the backyard. And my grandmother, she was a large lady, and she got that BB gun and just got those wings flapping, man. She just started cranking that thing, like pumping it, like, whoa, settle down. And she was cussing up a storm, so mad this dog was in our backyard again. She pumped it about 12 times too many, and she misaimed and shot it in the head and killed it. Killed the neighbor's dog. And I was like, Grandma, I think you hit it in the head. I'm like a little kid. I was like, I think you hit it in the head. And she was like, you stay right here, you little pot licker. She heads out there. Everybody's a pot licker. I'm going to go check this pot licker out. So she goes out there, in her moo-moo. She goes stomping out to the back fence or whatever. And I was like, that thing's not moving. That thing's not moving at all. And she told me, get in the car right now, you pot licker. And so she grabs the dog, drags it across the yard, puts it in the back of our car. We drive out a country mile or so, and she drops it in the ditch. On the country road, she turns around, she looks at me, and she says, don't you ever tell your grandfather about this. I was like, at that moment, my grandmother's a gangster. I'm not saying crap to anybody. My grandmother is a gangster. I didn't say anything. She didn't tell Elvin, my grandfather, when he came home. It was real quiet. She cooked a real nice supper, and it was a real quiet evening where she didn't talk about soap operas or nothing that night. Now, I remember a few years ago, we were at Thanksgiving in Toledo with my grandfather, with my mom, with my brother, Shannon, our family. We're sitting around having a rare Thanksgiving dinner, like sitting looking like a normal family around the meal there. And we're telling funny stories, stuff my grandmother used to say, ways she used to call people pot licker in inappropriate moments, and ways she cussed incorrectly and all that kind of stuff. And finally I said, man, do you remember that time She killed the neighbor's dog with that BB gun? That was crazy, right? And they all looked at me with blank stares. And I was like, you still don't know. Grandpa, you don't know? He just looked at me like, oh no, there's another story I don't know. And I told them the story and they were just in awe. This is why it sucks to be lost. There are predators out there like my grandma. My gangster grandma will pop a cap at you, okay? And that's kind of the point about being lost is like when you wander and you don't have a leader, you don't have protection, you are so exposed spiritually in so many ways. Like you know this. You know when you feel insecure and unloved by people, you're exposed when you go to the nightclubs. When you feel no love, when you feel no direction, you are exposed in so many. When you have an inclination toward addiction and you feel lost, you're exposed. Like in so many ways, there are so many predators, including spiritual predators out there who want to take advantage of that. There are predators in the movie. Little Saru, as soon as he gets to Calcutta, he tries to buy a ticket home, but they can't even understand what he's saying. He speaks a different language. He ends up sleeping in the train station on cardboard with street kids. They invite him over, give him a piece of cardboard so he can sleep with them in the train station. He wakes up in the middle of the night to men with evil intentions who are trying to kidnap all the kids. He's the only one who escapes and runs out into the city, and now he's out into the city. And he lives under a bridge for a long time, fending for himself as a 5-year-old boy, and continues to cross paths with predators because he's lost, so therefore he's exposed. And that's how it is spiritually. Like some people who are lost, they turn to things to cope, websites to hook up for a night. You know, whether it's pills or the bottle, this is not even a rare story in a crowd. If we aren't addicted to pills or something in a bottle, we're like, oh, this is just really over-the-top stuff. This is really, really lost people. No, it's people in this room who are lost and struggling and filled with pain. You know, in the film, later on, adult Saru, he sinks into drinking and eventually quits his job, and he sinks into depression, and it's all because he's lost. He says that. Like he's so stuck and lost because lost sucks. There are some people who think about ending their lives. There are probably people in this room who have thought about that within the last week. They've thought about ending their lives. You know, as a music fan, this summer sucked. Like 2 of my favorite hard rock vocalists hung themselves from late spring into the summer. Chris Cornell, former singer for Audioslave and Soundgarden, and then Chester Bennington from Linkin Park. Man, those were maybe my 2 favorite hard rock vocalists. And I'm not saying this to judge. I'm saying this with a heart of compassion. It's heartbreaking. Like, I mean, mix fame into that too, and that's all the more difficult. But they struggle with depression and substance abuse. It was just a toxic combination. And then for Chester Bennington to lose his friend, Chris Cornell, that was added for him. He's grieving and he's brokenhearted. And they both hung themselves and killed themselves in the spring and in the summer. Man, lost sucks. It sucks really, really bad. And there are some people around you who feel lost. You know, I guarantee you, in your middle school, in your high school, in your workplace, there are people who they might look all right, but if you really got close to them and got to know them, you would see more and more signs they're lost. They are begging for spiritual leadership and begging for love and to be accepted and to have a flock that they can lean on. They want that. Eventually in the film, little Saru ends up in an orphanage in Calcutta, and eventually he's adopted by an Australian married couple. And so he goes to Australia, and he's raised in Australia, and the film moves forward 20 years. And 20 years later, he's studying hotel management, and he's now a student, and he begins dating an American student named Lucy. And one evening during a meal, they go to some classmates' house, and it just so happens that the people hosting this party, his friends, his classmates, are an Indian family, and they're cooking Indian food. And one time he wanders into the kitchen, and he sees this Indian dessert, this delicacy that he used to long for. He used to ask Gadu to buy for him when they'd steal coal and they'd have money for milk. He'd ask, could he have this particular sweet? And he's like, oh, one day I'll buy you tons of those. And he sees this dessert in the kitchen of this Indian couple, And he just has flashbacks. And he starts thinking about the family that he was separated from and the home that he ended up wandering away from. And he just gets leveled right there. And they're all like, what's wrong? And he says, when I introduced myself to you, which we saw in the trailer, and I said I'm from Calcutta, the truth is I'm not really from Calcutta. I'm lost. And through the film, a few times as an adult, he describes himself as being lost. Like, I don't know who I am or where I'm from. I've been separated from the people that I was supposed to grow up with. I'm not home. I'm far away from home. I'm lost. And it's crazy because, interesting side note, as an adult in the film, Saru, his lostness affects every relationship that means something to him in his life, with his girlfriend, his adoptive mom and father, his adopted brother. His lostness directly affects all of them. And he disconnects eventually for a time from his girlfriend Lucy, and they start struggling. And there's one night after a party where they're talking outside, and it's an emotional, passionate kind of scene, and it's featured for a second in the trailer. But he says to his girlfriend, "Do you have any idea what it's like to know my brother and mother spend every day of their lives looking for me? How for 25 years, every day, my real brother screams my name. Can you imagine the pain they must be in not knowing where I am?" And he talks about just how being lost for 25 years is affecting him psychologically. And she says, "Why didn't you tell me this was happening to you?" And the bottom line is, loss sucks. It really, really sucks to be lost. And that's why Jesus is described in Matthew 9 like this. It says, when Jesus saw the crowds, all the people that came to hear him teach, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd, like people who had wandered away from their leader and wandered away from home. He had compassion on them because he knew how exposed they were, without direction, without protection. So loss sucks, and I gotta let you know, that is the reason why God came to earth. That is the reason why Jesus shows up, God in the flesh, is he's living out what's happening in Luke 15 in the parable of the lost sheep. He is going after the lost. He's showing up to come do what he needs to do to seek and save the lost. At one point, calling himself the Son of Man, he says the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. What's your mission statement, Jesus? I'm here for the lost. And as you can imagine, he faced a lot of criticism, as we see at the beginning of Luke 15, for spending so much time with the lost. Hey, we're the religious hoity-toities. Why aren't you hanging out more with us? We're the ones who say the right things and supposedly believe the right things. Jesus is like, okay, but then you guys are good. Okay, so I'm going to go hang out with the lost, with the riffraff, with the outcasts, with the misfits. The good shepherd, Jesus, made lost sheep his priority, and he was criticized for it, okay? In her classic book, a classic book by Becky Pippert, she has a book called Get Out of the Salt Shaker and Into the World, and I love what she does in this book where she compares Jesus' view of holiness to the Pharisees, those religious people in the first century, their view of holiness. And it's funny because the Pharisees' view of holiness has them separate from lost, broken, wounded people. They separate themselves because they think, that's kind of messy and dirty. I don't want to end up having that rub off on me. I'm trying to be holy. But it's funny that Jesus' view of holiness is the exact opposite. Jesus' view of what holiness is, being like God, has him awfully close to lost people all the time. He actually moves in closer in proximity to broken, wounded people who are acting out in terrible ways that hurt themselves and hurt others. Jesus draws closer to them, and he shows us that that's what we're supposed to do also. It's funny because if you think of, no matter how much or how little experience you have with the American church, whose view of holiness do we follow in the American church? Clearly the Pharisees' holiness view, and that is we separate from the lost, the broken, the wounded, and the people who are acting out in pain. And not Jesus' view, which is Jesus was criticized for eating with sinners. He moved in close in proximity. And so Jesus did two things. He radically identified with lost people, and he was radically different than lost people. He covered himself in prayer constantly to say, I'm going in, and he'd pray to the Father, and he'd make sure that he was centered and close to the Father as he did that stuff. You know, and you notice in Luke 15 that Jesus wants you also to think like a shepherd. He isn't the only shepherd that should be pictured in this scenario. In Luke 15, Jesus wants you to think like a shepherd. He says, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one. He's trying to get you to think like a shepherd, not just like one of the sheep. He wants you to convert, really, to think like a shepherd. What if you lost a sheep and you had 100? What would you do? How would you respond? How would you act in compassion for little Saru? How would you act in compassion for this lost sheep? One thing I challenge all of you to do, this is something everyone can do. It doesn't matter if it's your very first week, it can begin now. And that is this. When we're out in the lobby at Momentum, one of the things we try to regularly challenge our leaders with and random people, anyone at Momentum, is to say it's easy to gravitate toward people you already know and to try to connect with people who are safe because you already know them. But for you, so many people in the lobby are strange faces. And for so many people here, you're not making any effort to try to meet brand new people. And so it might be someone that's new to you, and they might have come to Momentum for the last 7 years, but you don't know because you've never met them. Or it could be their very first Sunday. And so to say, try to break away from those few people that you know you always hang out with. We've got Mo groups for that. We've got opportunities to serve during the week. You can have coffee with anyone that you already know. Facebook them. Ask them to have coffee with you. Connect outside of here. But do what Jesus did and prioritize the lost person. Say, I don't know this person. They're new. They might be a first-timer. I want to help them get connected. And what I always say is to be a linebacker in the lobby, okay? I like football. I am a Buckeye fan, by the way. I'm not dissing the Buckeye. I'm so sad about what happened yesterday. So sad. So anyways, that's Martin Lawrence, Bad Boys. So sad. But linebackers in the lobby are basically this. We say, you might be engaged with someone right there that you're talking to that you really enjoy connecting with, but you can connect with them anytime. So what a linebacker learns to do is he has to disengage blockers. You have to disengage and go make the tackle. And so I say, just nicely say to your friend that you already know who should be mature enough to hear, hey, hold on one second. There's a new person I'd like to meet. I want to go talk to them. And you disengage from the block, and I think it'd be fun if you just went and tackled that new person. Get a buddy to team up with you, high and low them. That'd be sweet, okay? And so you just say, hey, I'm going to go meet this new person. It's awkward. You might have to cut off a conversation that might be long and boring even. You know, like, hey, hold on one second. I'm going to go talk to this new person. And you just leave, okay? If someone's feelings are hurt by that, okay, come on. Let's all just real quick, brief side moment. Let's just all grow up a little bit and say, we can handle that, can't we? We can handle that. Someone we know saying, hold on. And you just go and engage because that's what the shepherd does. I remember once when we were starting our other campus 3 years ago, we were teaching the launch team of that new campus this. Like, man, there's going to be so many new people. You guys are the leaders. You're it. You have to meet people. It can't just be me or other staff people like Curtis. You have to meet people and engage people and welcome them in. And I remember someone later criticizing me and saying, I think it's awful that you talk about and celebrate walking away from conversations with people that you know. And you know what? In the midst of that criticism, I thought, I think I'm in good company because that's exactly what Jesus was criticized for. Like, why are you going to talk to them? Why don't you spend more time with me? I'm just trying to prioritize lost sheep. This might be the only chance they're given church, period. And I'm not going to take the risk that they're going to walk out of here and not be said hi to and never, ever go to another church again, whether Momentum or Cuyahoga Valley or the Rock Church. I'm not taking that chance. And so I disengage, leave the block, and go make the tackle and hit them hard. I like that. I really like the idea of punching. Okay, so anyways, moving on. So if you're criticized, you're in good company. You know, this week, Mo groups start back up. Woo! And so one of the things that's going to happen is you're going to get there, and there's going to be some new people. Some of you are going to have the courage to say, okay, I'm getting in a Mo group. And you're going to go to a Mo group for your first time. And while you're there in your Mo group, look around the room, not just the leader. I'm asking you, who's not the leader, to look around the room and be like, yes, we got some new people in our Mo group. This is pretty awesome. But also to look around and just say, hey, there was somebody that used to come to our Mo group at the end of the spring. Maybe they've wandered away. Maybe they've disappeared. I'm going to check up on them. Today, this week, whatever, let's see if any of them wandered away. Let's chase them down and bring them back. We don't know what they went through in the summer. Let's check in on them. That is at the heart of God, to search for wandering people that become disconnected. Ezekiel 34 says, This is what the sovereign Lord says. I myself will search for my sheep. I will search for the lost and bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak. I'm asking you to chase down the strays. If there are people who went through it this summer, then chase them down and say, are you okay? What can our Mo group do to rally to you? We want to come around you right now during this time. And we'd love to have you back in this flock so that we can have each other's backs. You know, when Saru tells his friends and his classmates, man, I'm lost. I got separated. I ended up on a train. They start grilling him with questions like, so you got on a train, okay, and how long were you on that train? He said, at least 2 days. Like, wow. And so they start kind of piecing together what they know, and they suggest to him how to search. They say, what you need to do is get on this new thing called Google Earth. This is all part of the true story. Use Google Earth to put together the evidence and try to figure out a search radius of where you could have come from. What was the name of your village? I keep saying it to people, but nobody's ever heard of it. Maybe you said it wrong because you were a little kid. So we got to figure it out and pinpoint this. And so he goes on, little Saru then, to big Saru now, to just start searching and thinking, okay, what evidence do I have? And using Google Earth to try to figure out where he came from and how he can get back home. And if you're someone who is a mature follower of Jesus, one, I hope you're in a Mo group, but your priority should be to help people find home, to help people get back home, wandering lost sheep. Encourage people to search and help them search. When you come across someone at work who's really afraid to show up at church, say, that's okay. Here's a way, mochurch.tv. You don't have to come for weeks. You can check this out from a distance, and you can safely be at home or a coffee shop, and you can search through watching on mochurch.tv. But you give people the tools to help them search and help them come home. You know, Momentum moves people forward to love God, love people, and make disciples who make disciples. And I'll tell you one thing Jesus did an awesome job of, and I'm often challenged by this, and I constantly think, I got to do better at that. And that is Jesus had meals with leaders and the lost. Okay, he found a way to invest in leaders and upcoming leaders and also to invest in the lost. And sometimes he mixed those two together, okay? So Jesus spent time with lost and leaders. You have 21 meals a week. Shoot, you're an American. You have 28 meals a week. Taco Bell's open all night, okay? So that's what I'm talking about, okay? So you have a lot of meals to say, okay, if I'm a mature follower of Jesus, I have to prioritize what my good shepherd prioritized and start finding a way to have some of those meals with leaders that I can learn from and I can also invest in. And I've also got to find ways to be around the lost, the people that Jesus was criticized for being with, who are broken and wounded. That's a priority. I know some followers of Jesus who really use lunchtime at work to deepen their relationships with the people that they're around because they know often there's a facade up, but then inside there's this deep woundedness that comes from being spiritually lost. And they build relationships during lunchtime. Sometimes they want to go be by themselves. They're tired. They want to do, but then sometimes they spend it with people who are lost, and they build friendships with them. I know one Christian couple who decided to have a "Who Are Those Guys" party in their neighborhood just because nobody knows their neighbors anymore, right? Okay? And so they said, okay, we're going to have a "Who Are Those Guys" party. We're going to invite everybody over, and we're just going to let them know who we are. And we're just going to hang out. We're going to grill out. We're going to eat ice cream. And so now that they've done that, it's connected people in their neighborhood, and they do that periodically. And they're simply building relationships with people around them who happen to be lost and wandering. And the parables of the lost sheep and the coin, I just want you to notice that it takes priority and it takes hard work to search for the sheep and for the lost coin. It takes work and effort, and it takes a purpose. Let me show you how the ending of this parable goes. Luke 15, verse 5. This is how Jesus ends the story. And Jesus says, and when he, the shepherd, finds the lost sheep, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders, and he goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep. He says, I tell you the truth, Jesus says, in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who don't need to repent. And that was a strong message right there for the Pharisees. And it was a little tongue-in-cheek because he knew they needed to repent. They needed to turn to God because they were religious hoity-toities, okay? So this is the way it ends. One of the things I love about Momentum is because we were started really understanding that I remember what it's like to be lost, and I know Jesus' heart for the lost. One of the things that we celebrate more than ever is when someone turns back to God. When someone who is lost becomes found, when someone who is blind now sees spiritually, we go nuts about that around here because we know that's reflecting what's happening in heaven. God's going crazy about this. The angels are partying because a lost sheep came home and now has the leadership and the protection of Jesus. Let me finish with this story. This is my sister-in-law that was over here singing harmony earlier, the blonde, all that kind of stuff. And her husband, Danny, and I went to Israel along with about 20 other ministers several years ago. We actually all wore this necklace, which is called the Jerusalem Cross. Looks like honeycomb cereal. That's cool. I'm an American, one of my 28 meals. And so a few years ago, we went to Israel, and we had this Palestinian tour guide who was kind of funny because he knew a lot. I mean, his job is to tell you cool stuff about the place that you're touring around in your pilgrimage. And so he would ask us questions, sometimes about the Bible, sometimes about intricate pieces hidden in the Old Testament of the Bible, sometimes about the history of Israel, sometimes about recent history in Israel. And he'd throw out a question, and then it'd just be awkwardly silent. And one of us 20 ministers would know, somebody's got to answer. He's not moving on. Like, oh, was it Britain? And he'd say, with just no compassion, no sensitivity, no cushioning the blow, no. And he'd just move on, like, okay, that was harsh, over and over. We start giggling about it in the evening. The guys would be like, man, this guy with these tough questions, and then when you're wrong, you take a shot at it. He's like, no. And he looks like you're an idiot, And so we're like, man, well, one day we were up at meeting together, and he was teaching us on the top of a hill outside of Bethlehem. And so literally there's down in the valley a shepherd walking sheep and goats. It was mind-blowing how cool this was. And he's talking to us about shepherding and teaching us what shepherding is really like. And so he's asking questions, and he says, sometimes we see a shepherd with a sheep on their neck, and they're carrying him. What does that mean? And this big 6'6" fellow rapper in Cleveland, Big Cleve, he says, means he's taking him back to the flock? No. And we're like, golly, man, I don't have the guts to tell Big Cleve no about anything, okay? And so we kind of like start, you can hear me, I have a video, I'm giggling like a little middle schooler, like, hey, just told you no. And we were just talking about that yesterday, And so then he goes on, and he said this. He said, actually, the flock, the sheep, they know their shepherd. And so they follow him where he goes all the time. But when they're young, some of them are wanderers. He said they roam away as they please, and they stray from the safety of the shepherd and the flock. And so what they would do is if some sheep does that over and over, what happens is the shepherd will go gather that wounded sheep, and he will break his leg. We're like, what? Did we just hear that right? And he would break his leg, but this is what would happen. He'd say, the shepherd doesn't leave him, though. He doesn't just leave him out in the wilderness and go with the rest of the flock. He picks the sheep up, he puts them around his neck, and he carries him for 6 weeks until the leg heals. Now think about what this does. It builds a bond between the wandering sheep who keeps going out being exposed where he could get shot in the head by my gangster grandmother. This is bad news for a wandering sheep that can't do anything to protect itself. The shepherd protects. So he says the best way to protect you is to allow you to be broken. He breaks his leg, carries him for 6 weeks. This bond becomes extremely strong between the wandering sheep and the shepherd. And after 6 weeks, he puts the sheep back into the flock. And guess what sheep follows the shepherd the closest after that? Because like a pet, he has this bond, this special connection to the shepherd. When he dropped that crap on us, we were like, what? Wait a minute, back up. Big Cleve literally said, hold on, can you say that again? Let me get my phone out. And he started filming. He's like, say it again. I'm sorry, just all through that again. Okay, there's a sheep, there's a flock, and he goes through it all a second time. And I was like, I'm using that in 2017 when I'm preaching for the beginning of the Mo at the Movie series, okay? I'm using that story. But here's the deal. Don't get caught up on whether God does something to hurt you, but God allows pain. And he allows pain for people who wander because he says, this is the whole point of why I want to lead you. When you choose to be your own leader, When you wander, you're exposed. You're at risk. And when you wander off, it's dangerous. And he allows us to be broken. Most people that come to Jesus, in my experience, come to Jesus and get close to God because they've been broken in some way. How many people become followers of Jesus through a divorce? How many people become followers of Jesus through an addiction, through the betrayal of a friend, through so many different ways? They're broken, and in their brokenness, they draw close to the shepherd, and they say, I will follow the shepherd more closely. My relationship with God is more intimate because of the fact that I've been broken, but I've learned to walk close to the shepherd for his wisdom, his direction, and his protection. Let's pray. God, I speak to a crew of people, some freshly lost, some lost now, some who have grown up knowing and following Jesus all their lives, but in their own ways have learned lessons about wandering away and needing your forgiveness and being broken. God, thank you that you put us all together to learn from one another. But God, I pray that our heart for the picture of a little Saru, that we'll have compassion for the people around us every day who are lost and hurting. God, to know that this is a refuge, that your church was made. One of the reasons it was made was to be a refuge for the lost, the wounded, the broken, the hurting. So God, thank you for that. Thank you that you made us a priority when we were lost and when we wandered, and you've saved us. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.